Ready.
Greetings, everyone. I'm going to change that view. Greetings, everyone. Today, I'm Sister Michelle, as you know. And today, our speaker is Sister Teresa Maya. And she is, Teddy Maya is in Spanish. And, um, and she is a sister of the Incarnate Word and out of Texas. And her topic today is the emergent leader, the emergent issues of religious life, the emergent all kinds of issues of religious life, and the future of religious life, and from a global perspective. So, Teddy Maya has held many leadership positions and continues to do so, and use her gifts in the way that God has called her. So today we get to hear her and hear her presentation to us about the emergent future of religious life. So at this point, I turn it over to Sister Teresa Maya.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Michelle, and thank you to the Poor Handmaids of Jesus for doing this. I really admire this program. I'm really delighted that you're all engaging in it, and I hope that this is helpful to your conversations and your unfolding discernment into your general chapter.
Thank
So,
you. Yeah.
Michelle invited me to talk about the emerging future of religious life from a global perspective. um, I hope that's the agreement, and I hope
Yes.
it helps. So anyway, let's um let's get started with a question. And people ask me this question all the time: what's the future of religious life? My own
Mm.
sisters, I ask myself that question all the time. So I want to get it off the table right away that I do not have a crystal ball. Um,
Mm.
hard as I have tried to find one, I still haven't been able to find one. So this is not about predicting or foreseeing or even wagering on it, but it's really, I think, an invitation to notice because the future already started. Whatever is going to be happening in the next 20 years is already something that we can see today. So, the big question we need to ask ourselves is what is already growing? What are the sprouts of the future that are already happening in our different environments, in our communities, in our ministries, in our conferences of religious in our different countries? What is it that we're already noticing that is telling us a little bit about what religious life is going to look like in the next couple of years? And actually, I believe this now. It's going to come faster than before because we are in a generational transition.
Mhm.
So here's my little list. And my invitation is that in your conversations, in your small groups, on your way to chapter and on your discernment, you consider what do you see emerging, not just for religious life of your community, the poor handmaids of Jesus, but religious life around you, religious life in the conferences where you live, religious life at a global level. What is your list? So here's my list. It's just to get you all started. First thing, mobilization. And I put it up first because it's going to impact everything in religious life. This mobility, I believe, really is going to be about religious sisters as migrants
Mm.
for the first time in many decades, because it's not the first time religious life migrates. The entire history of religious life in the United States is the history of migration. In fact, some people will claim that the reason we had so many sisters in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s is because we had Irish immigrants coming into our communities. And so today is no different. Mobilization is a big deal for Catholic sisters, not just to the United States or the global north, but around the planet. International communities are also increasing this movement. We didn't used to move that much. We would go to chapter, we would meet one another, have translators, share some time at tables, and then everybody would go home. But now we're starting to see things like international novitiates, like interprovincial government, like committees. And because we have Zoom and technology and airplanes, we can do this more. The first generation of the international novitiate novices are coming of age. So these experiments in international formation, in closing the gaps, in getting groups together, are now the people who are in their 40s and 50s and getting poised and ready for the next generation of leadership. So mobilization. And international community life is happening more and more at the local level. Not that it didn't before, but in the past, it happened when there was a dominant culture in the community. Today, the shift is beginning to show, and that's affecting even how we pray, what we eat, who we live with, and all of that. And finally, for those of you that are not as familiar, there's a book um, that's called Migrants for Mission. And I think it's important to read it, but it's only about migration to the United States. However, we're seeing sisters from Mexico go to Africa. We're seeing sisters from India come to the United States. We're seeing sisters from Peru going to Europe and different parts. So we're seeing migration not just to the U.S. but across the globe. This will imply that we're going to have to learn with diversity and difference at a very different level. So, some questions for you to consider. How are we learning to live with one another on a daily basis with all this difference? What does diversity and leadership mean for our congregations? How prepared are we for greater cultural interactions? And a very important question: what is the dominant culture in our congregation? And I say that with a lot of love because sometimes we have confused the charism of our institute with the dominant culture of our institute in simple things like how we make decisions or how we organize an event, and in more complex things like what does it mean to belong to this institute? And we think that it has to have a certain profile. So, this growing diversity, this coming of age of our presence around the globe for American based communities or European based communities, is now going to shift. And so, how are we getting ready for that shift? What about prejudices that we have for one another? Unconscious bias, as we mentioned. What about racism and classism? Because that's the one thing we never talk about. So, how do we deal with this diversity and difference as we go move into this mobility? Second thing that is already shifting and changing has to do with ministries and the apostolates, depending where you are. Ministry is continuing to evolve in all of our religious institutes, not just in the United States, but institutional ministries are beginning to transition for the simple reason that we don't have that many sisters to lead them. So our collaboration with the laity is increasing. Now, some people in the global south would say we don't have that problem. They used to say that, but now they're starting to realize that even in places like Latin America, like India or Africa, we will never have enough sisters to staff all of our institutional ministries. So that evolution will continue, and we will need to discern what is the relationship between religious life and its institutional or corporate ministries? That's a big question, and it's a big, big, important debate. Not debate, but discernment that we need to have because, in many ways, apostolates or ministry is at the heart of the identity of our religious institutes. We also beginning to see emerging ministries, new ones, like ministries with migrants, ministries for the care of the earth, ministries for advocacy. Um, and collaboration is a key component of that. So, how is your institute really engaging with other religious congregations, with other Catholic organizations, with other faith based groups, or with other groups that are, have a kind of a human component to it to really collaborate? And then, of course, there's the concept of intercongregational ministry. We've talked about it for 30 years. We say we really appreciate it, we want to do it, but we haven't really done it. There are some excellent examples across the globe, but I would even suggest that in some of the initiatives in the global south, we still have much more to do. If we really care about a school, why not join with another community and create some kind of social education project? If we're really worried about migrants and migrants cross borders, why aren't we collaborating with all kinds of agencies and organizations? So we have to lean into this collaboration. And finally, we might be looking at a moment where we're going to be building more programs instead of ministries. Programs that are kind of lighter, easier to move from one place to another where people can collaborate. So, for sure, there's a changing face of ministry or the apostolate, and our apostolic identity as apostolic institutes is absolutely crucial. So we cannot look at what is emerging without look at what we're doing and
Mm.
why and with whom. Third item that I think we need to consider for the emerging or what is emerging in religious life is the impact of technology. And especially for those of us that finally learned how to mute and unmute during the pandemic, this is a big deal because the impact of technology is going to change many things. Many things. Formation opportunities like you're doing right now,
Mhm.
connection opportunities, being able to talk to people that you normally would only see at the general chapter. Now you have conversations in the in between time. That's huge. Networking opportunities. And of course, greater internationalization. Why? Why this is critical is because it's creating a lot of relationship and connections and networks where we're going to build whatever is coming. It closes gaps and distances. It creates opportunities to get to know people. It's not a replacement for in person, but it's definitely impacting religious life. The next part, fourth thing, which I think is absolutely critical, and I spend a little bit more time here, is a demographic shift. For the very first time in a very long time, we're going to see a generational transition like we have not seen in religious life ever. And I want to highlight that we have never seen a generational transition like the one we're living through right now because we've never been like this before. I've tried very hard to explain to my own community and to many communities across the divides, whether it's in the continent in the United States, small or large, or in Europe, but I've not been able to get across that we're about to live something absolutely critical. I tried with many graphics. People hate statistics and demographics, but here was, for example, a graphic I did for a community. I tried and I put in the core of this graphic, you can see the older sisters, that orange is sisters that are like 100 or more. And then that golden color around them is the number of sisters who are in their 80s. And then that blue is the cohorts of sisters who are in their 70s. And the very thin layer around the green and the pink that you see there are the sisters who are in their 50s. And then the occasional pink is 20 to 40. Now, this is one religious institute, but we can even see another one. And it's the same story. Here, they don't break down the sisters who are 100, the 90 to 100, but they break down the 80. The group that is in the core is the really old ones, that's like beyond that, and then 80, 70, 60, and 50. So, no matter what, we are facing a situation where that really large cohort, the cohort that got us through the changes of the Vatican Council, that uh, began this collaboration with groups from other parts of the world, that went as missionaries to Peru and to Uganda and to Guatemala. They're all 80 something. and actually more like 85. That generation is passing. So, no matter what, demographics is going to be a big part of what's happening. So, how are we going to face this demographic shift? How are we going to face it? How do we overcome what I would call a generational trauma? This big cohort that's about to move on or has begun to move on, as we all know that. Are we ready for the transition? Or are we just afraid and not able to speak about it? How do we transition intentionally? Because what's coming now is that big shift. And what does this mean for our congregation? And very specifically, what does that mean for the poor handmaids? How are we going to honor these wisdom figures, these incredible women that they marched, they embraced the collaboration, intentional work with vulnerable communities. They moved us out of kind of very institutional models of doing ministry. How are we going to honor that wisdom as long as we have it, but also prepare ourselves as younger members and our institute for that transition? How are we going to shift our mindset from thinking that we're fewer and fewer and fewer to understanding that we are enough? We
Mm,
are enough.
mm,
And I have to highlight, we are the age and the size and the group that God wants for this time in history. It might be a grace filled thing. We are who is needed to face what is coming. So I love this phrase from the author of The Little Prince that I keep repeating, thanks to one a sister Charity that taught it to me. And this is it. Your task is not to foresee the future, but to enable it.
mm,
So in the middle of this demographic shift, what is it that we need to do? I think we need to take care of our elders, but in a missionary way, as a missionary task. Because I've noticed all over the world that we are tending to cloister. We sometimes are using our elders as an excuse not to do something different. Oh, we need to accompany our sisters. And here it's very important that we notice the cultural impact on our attitudes towards aging. I'll give you an example. I lived with an American sister and a Mexican sister was coming. And she said, Terry, when sister comes, I want you to sit with us and help me translate because I want to tell her that here in America, we do everything. And I said, when this sister comes, I'm going to sit with the two of you and I'm going to tell her, I'm going to tell you that you need to make some room for her culture.
mm,
Her culture, elders are valuable in the community and it's important to help them. And so you need to give her some room so she can help you. And she also needs to allow you to do your thing. But we need to be very careful that aging doesn't all bring us into the mother house or our provincial house or to our community to take care of our older sisters and only do that. Because
mm,
I don't think that is what God is asking of us. And that's why I really like this author, Thomas Halleck. And he has something to say about our church that is cloistering. He says, how do we counter the attempts to make a ghetto out of the church, a closed bunker with a key, a mausoleum with the securities of the past, or a private garden for consumers of calming drugs? Religious life, especially apostolic institutes, are about being out there. And we need to live through this time with that apostolic identity and mindset, asking ourselves the question, what is ours to do today as we are? As we are. And I love this example because I was in going to Colombia for a presentation with the CLAR, the Conference of Religious of Latin America. And one of my dear, dear sisters that I love, she's 87, I felt I hadn't had time to go see her. And so I told her I was very sorry that I was leaving and it would be a couple of weeks before I could go to see her. And she sent me a text message. And this is what she wrote. No, I have not been neglected. You're all busy doing ministry. I'm enjoying retirement. You're too much. So, how do we listen to our elders that want us doing something out there, because that's what gives them energy. They want to know that we're really trying to make this world the world that God dreams for us. At the same time, how do we learn to welcome that trust and to move in that direction? What is it that we need to do to build on that trust, on that generational trust, to face this transition? Now, for those of you that have a large cohort of sisters in the United States, it's important to understand what is happening in the US. The data on your screen is from the National Religious Retirement Office. In the bottom, you can see the cohorts between 30 and 90, 50 and 60, and 70. In 1985, the cohort between 50 and 69, that's that tall, I guess it's
Maroon. Yeah.
purple, maroon. 85% of the sisters in 1895 were 50 to 69 years old. Today in the United States, 71% of the sisters are 70 or plus. And I want to say this, the NRO was very generous because really they're 80 or plus. That's our profile of religious life in the United States. What does it mean to be of that age? And what does that mean to the rest of us around the planet that belong to an international community? We would suggest then that we have a pyramid that's lopsided. We have a very large cohort, and that's the cohort, that's the transition I'm talking about. But we also have women who are in the middle ages, should be ready to move into the leadership of our community and to make this emerging future possible. So if we have middle-aged sisters, which will be a blessing for our institutes, as long as we can make the generational transition with wisdom. So our older sisters need to trust the next generations that are coming, even though they might be from another country, or they might not speak English, or they might speak English with an accent. And our younger middle-aged cohorts need to take that responsibility, even though we might say, oh, I've never wanted leadership, or we don't think we're worthy, or it's not our turn, or whatever. But trust needs to be a big part of it. And finally, what I think for religious life that's emerging has to do with synodality. I think we have to show a passion for synodality that models it for the whole church. I would even say that religious life should be the prophetic place for synodality at this point in our history. For sure, this is the time to accelerate collaboration, not just within our institute, but within our church. It is absolutely urgent for the times we're living. And my reflection when I saw this picture, this is
Mm-hmm.
a gathering for the synod in October, and I heard a lot of people that came back from the synod, and they were all excited because they sat in circles, and I'm like, what's the big deal? Like, you know, this is a typical general chapter of a religious community. We've
Mm-hmm.
been sitting in circles for decades. But then I asked myself the question, why haven't we shared those practices with the rest of the church?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they internal to the way we do things and govern? How much of this experience needs to be for others? And so, in that sense, I think synodality is an absolute task for all of us. And it's absolutely important that we begin this process because, in many different ways, we need to ask ourselves the question with the church, what does it mean to be Christian today? What does it mean to be Christian today? We need a spirituality that is relevant to the present. If we are going to be true to our apostolic identity, if we are going to be true to our charisms, then we absolutely need a new and daring dialogue with our present. And that's what the Synod is inviting us to do, to listen intently to the time and the people and those who have left and those of other faiths, and especially those who are in the margin. Because we need to ask ourselves the question as religious, are we maybe withdrawing from a dialogue with our culture? And that's why the synodal process is a spiritual process of really engaging in dialogue and conversation, of crossing the aisle with those that think differently, or those that might have a different theology or way of being religious, even. But we need to be absolutely synodal. And so it's time to pay attention what is happening in the present. And to do that, I will conclude with the image of the field hospital. Now, you could have a field hospital like the one you see on the screen, but in my head, field hospital is more like the program I used to see when I was a kid.
Mm,
But the truth is that field hospitals are very difficult places.
mm,
They're very sad places. They're places of life or death. There's never enough resources. There's never enough people to help. But those that are doing what they can are doing it intentionally, collaboratively, and they're getting help from everyone around them. So I believe that religious life is called today really to extend the tent of that field hospital. It's not an accident that the synodal symbol is a tent. We need to enlarge the tent. We need to make it solid, but also movable, because that's the world we're in. And we need to ask ourselves the question, what do we need to do for religious life to be present in the field hospital with resources, sisters, influence, lay collaborators, so that we can start moving into the next century, into the next decades of religious life. We are definitely living through a new moment for religious life.
mhm.
What new learnings do we need? What new learnings? What do you see emerging? Well, that's my list, Michelle. I pray that together as poor handmaids, you'll be able to discern your own list as you move into the general chapter.
That is just wonderful. I, Teddy, it was, I'm going to watch this a number of times because it is really loaded. And, and one of the things I think the challenge for our sisters is to hear these speakers, which we have during this month, and to go back and listen for how does what you just said, how does that relate to us as poor handmaids today? And in this present, and what is our call as we move toward chapter? But that emerging future is now, it is tomorrow, but it was really has roots in the today. So
Absolutely.
so thank you so much for challenging us from the global perspective. I think you're one of the first speakers that talked about that international community that we have. We have an international community, and um, and we want to make it intercultural congregation rather than just simply an international community. And so we're working on that. Our sisters are getting to know each other through this program, and then through our committees and through our groups that are working toward 2025 chapter.
And you have a
So
blessing because you are international.
yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. Those religious congregations that are not have have a different have a different challenge in front of them. But because we're international And when we're making many more strides on functioning interculturally. And so there's a number of initiatives that are helping us. There's education, there's speakers through this program and others. So, but you've really helped us today to kind of articulate what we would see, what you would see, and to really challenge us to, so what is our list? So our sisters, what is our list of issues regarding the emergent future and what we need to do? Thank you so much. And then that ends our presentation for today. Enjoy.